Director Jason Maxidon, TWRA Deputy Director of Field Operations Brandon Ware, and University of Tennessee School of Natural Resources Wildlife Veterinarian Dr. Dan Grove. We're going to begin with an opening statement from Director Maxidon and then open the floor for questions. If you wish to be called on for a question, please use the raised hand feature and we will call on you one at a time. We do have a lot of outlets on the line, so please keep your question to one, and if necessary, a clarifying question. And if we have time for more, we'll circle back around. Please remain on mute when not speaking to ensure clean audio for everyone participating. With that, Director Maxidon, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Emily. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We wish that we were coming to you with better news, but unfortunately today we're discussing one of the greatest challenges in wildlife management, which is managing at the population level rather than the individual level. 75 years ago, when this agency was founded, there were almost no bears left in Tennessee due to overhunting. Through dedicated habitat work and conservation, now we estimate that there are more than 6,000 bears throughout the state, and the population continues to grow and expand. As part of conservation efforts, the agency regulates and permits wildlife rehabilitation facilities, such as the Appalachian Bear Rescue, to accept orphan or injured black bear cubs. Bears are usually returned to the wild after 6 to 9 months. To ensure that they're able to return to the wild, it's incredibly important that they're not held at the facility for too long to prevent them from becoming habituated to humans. Or to put it another way, we don't want them to become so comfortable being around humans that they will approach them once they're released back into the wild. When that happens, it causes human-bear conflicts like we see routinely in Gatlinburg. Last year in 2023, several bears at ABR developed symptoms of pneumonia. One succumbed to its illness. One was so sick that it died under anesthesia. One was euthanized and 3 were released. If we knew what we know now, we would not have released those bears either. This year, 2 more bears that were placed in the same enclosures as the previous bears also developed similar pneumonia symptoms, which immediately made us concerned about the quality of the environmental conditions at ABR and the extent of the disease exposure at the facility. Because ABR does not have a veterinarian on staff, and because TWRA is the agency responsible for the management of the bears in their care, we consulted with the University of Tennessee College of Veterinary Medicine vets who had been providing care and treatment to the sick bears. We also consulted with UT School of Natural Resources veterinarian Dr. Grove, the National Park Service, and Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife because one of the bears was from their state. This group of experts agreed that our #1 priority should be preventing the wild bear population from being exposed to this disease, which had already been proven to be fatal. Once an infectious disease is introduced into a wildlife population, it's nearly impossible to manage or eradicate. Because of this, we made the very difficult decision to euthanize the 13 bears which had been exposed to the disease to protect the safety of the entire wild bear population. I personally spoke to the director of ABR about this decision. I was very frustrated to see that they're claiming they were not included in this conversation. ABR's executive director was invited more than once to meet with the veterinarians and ask questions. A second meeting was offered when I talked to her personally, and ABR's board chair also refused to speak with me on this issue. We made every effort to keep them involved, but because they disagreed with the decision, they didn't want to speak with us about it. These bears were in the care of ABR when they became sick. The majority of these orphan cubs housed at the ABR are brought to the facility by TWRA biologists. So to ensure the safety of these cubs, TWRA will not be housing any additional cubs at ABR until biosecurity measures are taken to sanitize the affected enclosure and protect other bears at the facility. Look, all of us who go into wildlife management are passionate about wildlife. Many of our team members hold master's degrees in wildlife biology and have specialized experience in the care and management of these species and their habitats. None of us enjoy making these types of decisions, but I want to be clear when I say TWRA stands behind this decision. It's the right thing to do for the wild bear population. Emily, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Director. At this time, we'll take questions. Please use the raised hand feature if you would like to ask a question, and you will be called upon. I see Evan Lasik first. Please identify which outlet you're from as you ask your question.
Hey, I'm with WVLT here in Knoxville. So my main question was, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what was the rationale again behind euthanizing instead of going through the treatment? This was shocked a lot of people.
Yeah, and what I would like to do with that question is defer to Dr. Dan Grove. So Dr. Grove, do you mind helping with that question?
Yes. To answer the question, just because a treatment occurs and you resolve what we call clinical signs, or the signs that you can actually visibly see with an animal, doesn't mean that the bacteria might not still be there, or the pathogen that's causing a disease might still be there. And because in wildlife, we can't run the risk of there being any chance that they may be what we call a subclinical carrier of disease. We can't run the risk that these diagnostics that we're doing, we're assuming it's the right diagnostic test for the particular pathogenic process that's occurring, but it may not be, because this is kind of a new thing. And so it's out of an abundance of caution that we're opted to go down this route.
Thank you, Dr. Grove. The next reporter question coming from Olivia. Olivia, please identify your outlet.
Good morning. I'm Olivia Daig with WBIR out of Knoxville. I had a question regarding what the process looks like to sanitize the area, make sure that it's unable to continue spreading that disease, and what that timeline looks like. What do bears, where will they go if they need help, if ABR is not suitable for them to be at?
Dr. Grove, I'm going to defer to you again on the sanitation.
In terms of sanitation, because this is an outdoor enclosure and there's a lot of natural materials, the recommendation is to do a controlled burn of it. And when we say that, we mean to burn off all the leaf litter and other debris that might be there, and get it to a certain temperature so that the top layers of soil reach a temperature that might destroy any pathogens that are there. And this is just kind of a good sanitation practice to do in these types of enclosures in general, as well as recommendation of using appropriate chemical sanitizers for any structures that may not be able to be, that may not survive like burning. So if there's any man-made structures or anything like that, there's sanitizing agents that we can use to actually do that. And then on top of that, because it is an outdoor enclosure, so to touch on that also, any indoor enclosures also, it's recommended that an appropriate sanitation occurs as well, and that's usually with chemical sanitizers. But leaving an area after you've done these measures set, because it is outdoors, the natural processes outdoors of sunlight and changing of temperatures and freezing can help potentially get rid of any additional pathogens. But it also guarantees that it sets for long enough where if there were pathogens left after all those processes, they potentially are destroyed by the other mechanisms. But it is extremely difficult to guarantee 100% that everything that might be in there is potentially gone. So these are the current methods that we have available to us.
At this time, I'm not seeing any other. Oh, Olivia has a clarifying question. Go ahead, Olivia.
Yeah, I wanted to touch back on what is the timeline for those facilities to be able to house bears again?
Yeah, and Olivia, go back to the first part of your question. At this time, we don't think, outside of pens 3 and 4, to our knowledge, there's no other bears that are affected to be concerned about in that facility at this time. As far as us putting any more bears, we're going to reevaluate our relationship with ABR and decide if we want to send any bears. At this time, we're not going to send any bears there until we know that the facility's been decontaminated. And again, we want to reevaluate that partnership before we make that decision.
Do we have any other reporters on the line with a question? Evan, go ahead.
Evan Lacey, WVLT. my main question is, have the bears now been euthanized yet? And how many does that make this year that have been put down?
So there are 13 bears planned to be euthanized. There are 5 still there at the facility that we plan to euthanize. And those 8 bears that were taken out yesterday were taken to the UT Vet Center. And last I heard, yes, all those have been euthanized and necropsies had begun on those.
Any other reporters on the line with a question? Olivia.
I wanted to kind of have you guys elaborate on, you said you need to reevaluate the relationship that TWRA has with ABR. Is that because of the comments that they made that they were not involved in the discussion, or is it another reason?
Yeah, twofold to that. Again, we're concerned about sending bears there until we can figure out the causative agent and what's going on in that facility. So that's one part of it. The second is, yes, some of this information has been misconstrued that they put out. We have been working with them. We have been trying to keep them informed of what's going on. So yes, that would be the second part of that.
Evan.
And can you walk us through the timeline of how long these conversations been going on, how long you've been looking at all of this stuff going for, and up until yesterday?
Certainly. And Deputy Director Ware, I may defer to you to go with the timelines. I can give a broad overview, but I think you have more specifics on the timeline.
Sure. Thank you, Director. I believe, from my understanding, that the staff at ABR had first noticed signs and symptoms in some of the bears around the end of November. They had taken one bear cub to the University of Tennessee to seek treatment, and it had begun treatment, and then we were not notified for about 5 days that it had been undergoing treatment. I believe it was on November 26th whenever we first received that communication of how many bears had been exposed and were housed in that pen, and that they had been treated for about 5 days. The University of Tennessee, the other partners that the director mentioned earlier, the University of Tennessee Vets, the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the National Park Service, they held a meeting on December 9th to further discuss, what the course of action should be. That included the vets from UT that had been treating those bears at ABR. And so that was discussed with them and then later with other professionals. At that time, on the same day of that meeting, they were notified by TWRA staff of our intentions for the initial 5 bears. We continued discussions over the next day, and on the 10th, the final decision was made that out of an abundance of caution, we didn't know the full extent of the exposure or how contagious this disease was or the threats that it posed to our native wild populations. So we let them know after the decision was made on the 10th that we would not be releasing any of those 13 bears. There were some follow-up conversations after that where we discussed and offered to have them, let them meet with the veterinarians involved in that discussion to explain to their staff or to their board. The director also, like you mentioned, had reached out to their director and to their board chair to offer more explanation, and that was declined.
At this time, I'm not seeing any additional hand raised. Do we have any other reporter questions on the line? Seeing none, we'd like to thank you all for being on the line today. We certainly understand that this is a tough issue with a lot of moving parts, so we appreciate your due diligence to allow us the opportunity to explain the situation. With that, I will conclude the meeting.
Thank you, everyone.